The 2024 national elections in South Africa were supposed to have been a watershed moment. We all knew, the pollsters had told us, sentiment indicated to us that the ANC was going to come short. Most importantly, the DA, main opposition, also knew from their own research that the ANC was not going to get a simple majority. When the election result was announced, the ANC didn't disappoint. They came in at 40%, in line with the predictions. What did that mean? That meant that collectively, the opposition had garnered 60% of the vote. Or rather, can you still remember the demeanor and the posture of Fikile Mbalula and some senior ANC official when they were reacting to this result? I mean, man, I found myself congratulating Mbalula. He was so humble. He was so humble. And the reason why the ANC displayed that kind of humility is because they knew that if the opposition got its game together, they would have been out in the cold. But what happened? The opposition, tragically, didn't seem to appreciate what the ANC knew and were afraid of. They didn't seem to know. Or if they knew, they lacked courage and vision to act on what they knew. What we saw was the DA now giving it into the politics of fear, yielding to the politics of fear. What did they do? They collapsed their own make-believe coalition, the Moonshot Pact, which was doomed to fail anyway because the numbers just didn't agree. It was a foregone conclusion that they were not going to cut it. And how did that happen? It happened because the main opposition, the DA, suffers from hubris. They proudly pronounced that they knew well in advance that the ANC was not going to make it. But what did they do? They alienated smaller opposition parties. They blacklisted the likes of EFF. Instead of using the 2-year or 3 or so grace period to be rallying the opposition, to be working on an agreement, transitional agreement, to a genuine multi-party democracy. But what we saw was the DA being so desperate and resorting to the politics of fear to the extent that they publicly pledged to protect President Ramaphosa against any motion of no confidence over Parapara. Let that sink in. An opposition party that was supposed to play oversight on the ruling party, pledging to protect the leader of the ruling party, not from some Machiavellian plot to oust him, but from a potentially very grave alleged misconduct, which today remains unresolved. And I'm telling you, when history of Parapara is written, when it is stated that Parapara was swept under the carpet, the DA deserves a significant share of the credit for the sweeping under the carpet of Parapara. Now the ANC realized that their fear didn't materialize. And smelling blood They seized the moment. They seized the opportunity. They created a government of national unity. And this was not a magnanimous gesture by any stretch of imagination. It was a self-preservation strategy. They knew that at 40%, they were always on the brink. So they wanted cushion. They want to build some fat to make sure that they could sit pretty and not face the prospect of being voted out of power. And what did we see? We saw a scramble. As soon as the opportunity to go into GNU, instead of the opposition focusing on mobilizing and rallying together to oust the ANC, no, they competed. They competed to join the feeding trough. And this rush to consummate a marriage between the ANC, a compromised administration, government of the ANC, some of these opposition parties were willing to sell out the public as far as measures such as like the VAT, which was going to place an unimaginable burden on the already struggling South African citizen. That's how far these opposition parties, like the like the Action SA, that's how far they were willing to go. With the DA, I doubt that they opposed it out of principle. You remember that was the time when the DA was very bitter about how they being treated by the ANC. It was after the arrogance of the ANC had reached dizzying height. Do you remember when President Ramaphosa said, "We are in charge"? And that was not a bluff. They were taking unilateral actions left and right, like Bella Bill, NHI, running foreign policy as if they were a majority party. And they felt invincible. And this was a party that was handed a mandate they did not win, because the opposition forgot its purpose and became greedy. So we've got a poverty of imagination among the opposition party. We need to face that reality, South Africa. It betrays a very core disease in our opposition body politic. Failure to imagine themselves in power. DA knew in advance the ANC would lose its majority. What was the plan? There was no plan. They went around castigating the PA, the EFF, labeling smaller parties as they are voting for them being of no consequence. I'm not saying they're not supposed to campaign, but they bent the bridges to an extent that it was no longer possible for them to work with those parties. They should have abandoned a paralyzing politics of fear. John Steenhuisen should have grown some emotional intelligence when to knock at the door of the ANC, of the EFF, when to knock at the door of Jacob Zuma, not necessarily out of love or out of commonality of values, but putting ideology aside and saying, guys, we are faced with the prospect of removing a party that has been in power for 30 years, which has become drunk with power. They are corrupt, they are working with criminal syndicates, and they've literally forgotten about the country. He should have put together a plan. They had 2 years to do that. Put together a plan to say that let's have a multi-party government, let's have a political front, a transitional one. Let's just focus on providing the basic services. make sure the South Africans are secure, make sure there is water, make sure there is electricity, make sure the basic services are running, and relegate the ANC to the dustbin of history. And we know that they were not going to recover from that. And level the playing field so that thereafter, each party can now, a member of the opposition party, if they felt like, would campaign on the basis of their own ideology and manifesto after the 5-year period, having transitioned the country into a true multi-party democracy. I mean, the templates are there. Zambia and Botswana, the parties of independence were unseated through unity of opposition political parties. That's the only way you can do it in South Africa. Without unity, with a childish and immature main opposition like the DA, I don't know how that unity is going to come about. Imagine if the DA had used its lead not to blacklist the likes of EFF, but to broker a difficult 5-year multi-party agreement. Focus solely on service delivery. I mean, it was not going to be difficult to convince Malema. It was not going to be difficult to convince Jacob Zuma, because they all have an axe to grind with the ANC's, with Ramaphosa's ANC. Now, projecting into the next coming election in 2026, I'm anxious. When I look at the 2026 November local government election, the prognosis is bleak. The ANC will, as expected, come out bruised again. But they may still remain dominant in metros and municipalities because of the ineptitude of our opposition. Not because of their own political prowess, not because they are loved by the voters, but because of the continued incompetence and petty rivalry and sheer lack of imagination of opposition parties. Had the DA had a figure like Madiba, an adult who has got emotional intelligence, let me tell you, the ANC would have long been out of power in 2024. Out of power. They are failing to rally the opposition for a credible alternative. Unfortunately, they are becoming very comfortable now in government. Now, in conclusion, I want to venture to say that the DA and the opposition parties are the enablers of the ANC's mismanagement. Going into 2026, to cripple the ANC would need to abandon the politics of fear. No doubt, the coalition of the MK, DA, and ANC would have crippled this country. But I want to tell you that sometimes you cannot go into negotiation like the DA, desperate, bound by fear. That's the last thing you want to do. You don't want to go to negotiate power sharing, gripped by fear like the DA was. You know how to deal with a bully. You have to to confront your worst fears and face the bully. And punch back. Now, if it comes to a must, instead of allowing yourself to be blackmailed, perhaps you must allow this coalition of doom to take over, so that South Africans who continue to vote for these parties should see for themselves what it means to have a coalition of compromised individuals like the ANC, politicians like the ANC MK party and the EFF. That's when people would learn a lesson. Instead of allowing yourself to be blackmailed, by choosing fear over strategy, patronage over principle, and narrow interests over national salvation, the opposition parties have become key enablers of this compromised government, which has weaponized key apparatus of the state against citizens of South Africa. If you talk about the death of Armand Swartz, if you talk about the death of Babita Deokran, these are people who are alleged to have been murdered by syndicates that are in league with senior politicians within the ANC, the ruling party. So as much as the apartheid government was the enemy of the people, I'm afraid the ANC has become the enemy of the people. They are crippling service delivery, crippling, they rise from their mansions to plot how to steal money from ordinary citizens. All the gains of democracy are being reversed because of their thuggery. If the ANC remains dominant after November local government election, we should no longer make this kind of political commentary lamenting the misrule of the ANC. We should level the blame squarely on the opposition, and us, voters, we should concede that South Africans have decided that they are comfortable with tavern massacres, they are comfortable with open borders, they are comfortable with the chaos and mismanagement of our funds, schools that are just open for the whole world, as if we've got unlimited funds, commissions, money that is just being thrown at commissions that are just vanity upon vanity, where no serious consequences flow out of such commissions. That's my take. I feel that the opposition are key enablers to the ANC's misrule. Let me know what you think. Please comment, like, share. Only if this content resonates with you. I'm Rendani, I'm the voice in the wilderness.